Welcome to the first video of the series Optimize Your MuseScore string sections playback. In this series of videos, I will be showing you how to get the most out of your MuseScore string sections playback, and that using two libraries. The first one is MuseScore's own and free MuseStrings library, and the second one is the Vienna Symphonic Library's Vienna Strings library. For the first two videos, we will be taking a look at MuseStrings. And the piece that we'll be using is a very famous piece, the Variation 9, Nimrod, from Edward Elgar's Enigma Variations. So let us first take a listen at how does the opening of this variation sound with MuseStrings, when what we have in our MuseScore file is a mirror image of the markings that we have in the printed score. Now, the big elephant in the room is pretty obvious here. It is the completely inorganic, explosive, overreactive surge of the dynamics in violas and celli, when in measures 6 and 7 the dynamics goes to mezzo forte. And then we have the second major dynamics issue, the much too abrupt return to pianissimo, which takes place in measure 9. So what we want to achieve is to tame the dynamics in that passage. And one possibility to do this is to replace our mezzo forte markings for violas and celli with mezzo piano markings. In other words, we are going just one step below the dynamic marking that is there in the printed score. Let's take a listen. Now, this is obviously a major improvement in comparison to our first version. And this leads us directly to the first important general principle of optimizing dynamics in MuseScore. Whenever you have a crescendo or a decrescendo with an ending that is too abrupt, too sudden dynamically, the first step in correcting this is to take that end marking one step down. In our example, that just meant taking the mezzo forte marking one notch down to mezzo piano, and the result was immediately much more continuous, much more organic in its dynamic flow. But let us now say that we still want to make one more really substantial musical change to how the whole dynamic of this opening is working for us musically. You have now noticed that the violas and celli in measure 6 and 7 are slightly dominant over the thematic part of the first violins. However, let us say that for our musical purposes, for how we want to shape this opening musically, we want to be having the first violin parts continuously dominant throughout this opening. Now, one way to approach getting to that result is taking the first violins part and putting a mezzo piano marking in measure 6 at the same place where the celli and the violas arrive to their mezzo piano. So putting in the mezzo piano marking for the first violins, they do the trick of getting the first violin's part to re-exert its dominance over the whole opening. However, at the same time, you probably noticed that inadvertently it led to us getting a part of our original problem back. Both the crescendo towards mezzo piano as well as the reversal to pianissimo are still too abrupt. Now, if you're working on a string orchestra piece of your own, even just for the purposes of, a good sounding demonstration production, you would still want to get results that are more subtle, that are more musical, that are more refined than this last version we arrived at. However, there will come a point where you will reach the limit of what can be done just by using the notation markings in MuseScore. But then the question arises, okay, if I'm now hitting the ceiling of what I can achieve by just changing the notation markings in MuseScore, how can I actually improve upon this result further? Well, there actually is a method to achieve that. However, in order for us to get to that point, we now have to take the output of our MuseStrings playback out of MuseScore. If you want to learn how that is done and how you can improve upon your MuseScore strings playback results outside of MuseScore, join me in the next video. Also, if you find this video to be useful, please like and subscribe, and do not forget to visit the Art of VSL. The link is in the description box. The Art of VSL is a school dedicated to classical musicians who strive to get the most out of their music and music making using Vienna Symphonic Library.